What an incredible movie and such a deep and heavy role for you to play. Writers are such interior people. They're so centered on self in some ways. What was it like for you to embody that?
Well, I think it's really, she's such a major poet. And the fact that they've never made a film about her before, I think speaks to that it's the interiority of her life, both, and also the many divergent opinions on what actually happened in her life and all of these passionate love affairs, whether they were, only emotional or had a physical element to them. I think that it's just been too daunting for people up to now to try and make a film of her. But one of the things that I think is really great in Terence's film is that we don't show her childhood per se, but we show her, kind of teenage years through her death when she's 56. And she goes through so many stages and so many things happen to her in her quiet life. And she changes so much as a person. So that was one of the things that I really love playing because, of course, we think of Emily as a person of great rapture and enthusiasm, and that continues with her through her life, but it's particularly in evidence when she's young. But then, she endures a lot of pain and a lot of heartbreak, and she becomes, as she says in the scene that you played, kind of a bitterness takes her over.
For the listener who isn't familiar with Emily Dickinson, who is she? Kind of a elevator pitch.
Right. So she's a 19th century woman who was born in Amherst, Massachusetts, and dies in Amherst, Massachusetts. And the Dickinsons, the family that she comes from, are a very important, not wealthy, but kind of intellectual, upper middle class family with a lot of power. Her brother was the treasurer of Amherst College, and for through many generations of presidents, and he said presidents come and go, but the Dickinsons go on.
Nice.
And she was a person who she wrote over 1,800 poems in her lifetime, and only really a handful of them were published. And she had almost no literary reputation. And then after she died, some of the best poems were compiled, and she became a literary sensation in just a very few short years after her death, and then the complete poems weren't brought out, I think, until the 1920s. But she's also a person who, she never married, she never had children. She stayed in her father's house until she died, and after both of her parents' deaths, she became so distraught. In those days, people would wear black in mourning for a year or more, and she made a very radical decision to wear white and to only wear white for the rest of her life as a sign of her mourning. And she then stopped leaving the house and eventually stopped leaving her room entirely.
What's it like to be trying to portray a person like that? You know how what her experience must have been like as a woman trying to be published then? Were there things that you could relate to as a woman in the industry you're in now? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I think that she's so modern, and by modern I don't just mean contemporary. She's very modernist. Her poetry feels very modernist now and so ahead of its time, but also a lot of the issues that she was grappling with, some of them poets had grappled with, like, is there a God, and what is eternity, and what happens after we die, and what do we owe God, and what if he doesn't exist? But I think decisions that she made in her life, not to marry and not to have children, and most women at that time, or even arguably in this time, don't even think of that as an open question.
Yeah.
It's just sort of assumed that that's something you will do if someone wants to marry you. So I think that, she's a very, on the one hand, she's very set in her time, and on the other hand, she kind of put her finger on, it's a direct line, it's a direct continuum from the things that she's writing about and thinking about in the mid-19th century to now.
And were you a fan of hers before the role, or did you just discover her?
I was a huge fan. My mother was a big fan of hers, and so as a child growing up, we had a record of Julie Harris reading some of her poems and some of her most famous letters. And so it really kind of, penetrated my psyche. It lived in my head, and I knew big chunks of them by heart. And I think that, people who discover Emily Dickinson and love her feel that she is really speaking directly to them, because what she's saying is so personal and it's so uncluttered. You know, some of the poetry, you try and read a lot of 19th century poetry, it's very verbose and it goes on and it's so flowery and it's just people who like to hear themselves talk, really.
Yeah, so
and
true.
her poetry is so, it's modernist, it's so spare. And the vocabulary she uses, the words she chooses are so surprising. They just sort of jolt you awake. And sometimes you know exactly what she's talking about. And sometimes you think, well, she could be talking about like one of 5 different things. And I'm not sure if she's talking about love of a, you know, sexual love, or maybe she's talking about God, or maybe she's talking about, you know, the birds and the trees. You know, it's, yeah.
And you had said at the beginning of the interview, those love affairs, whether they were emotional or physical.
Yeah.
When you read her, do you think it matters whether they were emotional or physical?
Yes, I don't think it matters too much. I mean, I think that, you know, I think that they were completely romantic in nature, and they were completely sexual in nature, whether anybody ever touched anybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She definitely had that full passionate feeling and experience.
Yes.
As you were exploring the role and looking at her, are there parts of her where you felt, oh, that's me?
Yes.
I
Oh,
feel that.
definitely. Definitely. I mean, I feel that, you know, having big feelings and you know, loving to connect with other people, but not necessarily thinking that, you know, getting all dressed up and going to a party is the way that people might notice how great you are.
Yeah.
You know, and that, and the sort of desire to be, you know, paid attention to, but kind of a reluctance for the sort of standard things that one does to make that happen. Yeah.
When watching the movie, I loved how it was left open. There were moments when you thought, oh, I think she has a crush on that man. No, I think she has a crush on that woman.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what's happening. I know she's yearning for passion, but I'm not sure where it is. How did you feel about the way that was portrayed?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that, you know, I think that there are many ways in which Emily is ahead of her time, and I think one of the ways in which she's ahead of her time is I don't feel that her sexual desire, you know, needs to be categorized.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
completely. And I also think, you know, the thing about Emily is she, particularly in the later part of her life when she became more and more reclusive, she would send gifts to people. And she would send them often gifts of poems, and she would wrap them up very artfully, and she would often include a flower with them or a drawing. I mean, they were not just, you know, they were very, but it was her way of connecting with people that she wasn't seeing face to face. And I think in a bizarre way, I think that Emily would have been so at home in our time because she would have been, you know, the tweeter extraordinaire.
She would have.
Do
She
you
could have
know?
stayed in her room.
Because I think she really would have, she wanted to connect, but she also wanted her privacy, you know?
And that must be a hard choice for you to make as a person who's in the public eye. You're also having to decide what you're going to share, what you're not going to share.
Right.
How hard is that for you to figure? You know, because sometimes the things that you share, I think you want to share because they will make a statement. What you
Right.
just talked about, not wanting to be put into a box.
Right, right.
How hard is it for you, and how do you decide how much you want to give?
Well, so I'm not on any social media because I just feel like I'm a person who's constant. I still have a BlackBerry.
Yeah. Oh,
And
nice.
and I'm constantly, you know, on there with my friends and my
Yeah.
family and people I work with, you know, doing business all the time. And if I had a whole other layer of people who, you know,
Were
that I
wanting
was
your
talking
time?
to, forget it. I would
Yeah.
never look up and see anybody face to face. And so if you ever see me on social media, on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, just know that's not me. That's just
so
someone.
those are all fans.
That's just somebody pretending to be me.
Oh, that's good to
And
know.
they don't seem to say anything offensive, so whatever. But that's not me.
That's really good to know. So many scholars have said, you know, that they think she had mental illness, whether it be depression or bipolar. Did you get a sense of that, and were you trying to portray a sense of that, or do you think there was just some quirkiness there?
I think that her mother had severe depression. And I think that Emily, you know, I think that she had some of that. And It's funny. It's when you talk about people having mental illness, it's not like, it's like, if you say a barn is red and then you've painted it all red, it's not like if someone is mentally ill, then you paint them all one color and that's what they are,
Right.
And I think that Emily's reclusiveness, it was partly something that she controlled and didn't control. It wasn't, she wasn't like Ophelia babbling to herself. I think she
Right.
had a lot of fears and a lot of anxieties, and I think she chose to remove herself from the world. But I don't think
wondered-
she was cuckoo.
I wondered watching, and I'm sure lots of queer listeners wondered watching. I kept trying to think of her in contemporary times, where, particularly in Canada, I know the experience in the States is a little different. In Canada, people aren't trying so hard to push you in a box. Mm-hmm. Who you like, never judge a book by its cover. Who you're going to love by your lover.
Right.
Canada embraces that.
Right.
Who you were in the past compared to who you're with now doesn't matter. If you're queer, you're queer.
Right.
I wondered if she lived now, maybe some of that have disappeared because she could have just been who she was.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about Emily that's so extraordinary. I was doing an interview early this morning, and someone asked me if I thought Emily Dickinson was a feminist, and then if I thought she would have categorized herself as a feminist if she was offered that term. And I think she's a feminist.
Yeah.
But I don't think that she would have thought of herself that way. And because I think that there were certain political movements that she admired. I think she thought, the fight for women's right to vote, I think she thought that was, had a lot of good in it. And I think certainly abolition and, But I think that she was so wary of any mass movement that I don't think she would have signed up for anything.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I think her thinking was so personal and so idiosyncratic. And when you join a movement, there are certain things I think you have to get on board with.
Yeah,
And I
that's
think
true.
that was the almost the most important thing for her was her individual personhood.
You have so often portrayed strong but complicated women in roles. Is that something you consciously look for, or have they just found you?
I think both. I mean, I think one of the nice things that I'm finding, knock on wood, is that when you start to age out of your childbearing years, the characters that you are given are far more just nuanced and complicated. You're not just there in service of other people. You're not there so much as a wife and a mother. You're there because I do think that women, particularly if they have children, they go through this period where they're a bit underwater.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're burdened in a wonderful way, but they're burdened, and it takes a lot of their focus. And then, I turned 50 this year. When you start to get to this age, it's sort of like your head comes out of the water again, and you look around and you start having considerations that have to do, more with you, and that's more interesting, right?
It absolutely
Yeah.
is. As a menopausal woman, I completely agree.
Yes, exactly.
The hot flashes are killing me, but other than that, we're fine. You're going to play Nancy Reagan.
I am. I did. It hasn't been on yet, but yes, I did.
What was that like?
It was really fascinating. I did a lot of research, and I read her book, and I read her daughter's book, and I read Kitty Kelly's book, and I read Peggy Noonan's book about working in the Reagan administration, and I just learned a lot about Nancy Reagan's childhood and how she was really, she wouldn't typify it this way, but I think she was really abandoned by both of her parents as a baby, and how she felt unloved and unlovable, and the kind of the quest that she went on after that to turn herself into, I don't think she thought she was very pretty or very smart or very special,
Right.
and that she was going to be the shiniest, best version of herself she could be. And then when she found Ronald Reagan, she said, I've been waiting all my life to be the person who matters more to another person than anybody else, and I finally found it.
Wow.
And it's the it's the center of my life, and
Yeah.
And so I think some people think that, which I don't at all, like in a Lady Macbeth, that she lived her career through her husband's career. I think that whatever he wanted to do, she would have made sure that he was he wanted to be a
Yeah.
fly fisherman. He would have, caught
You'd have been
Moby
the
Dick,
best.
right?
Yeah.
But she wanted to be part of a partnership because I think she kind of missed that part of her childhood.
It's amazing to hear you talk about her. I would assume she wouldn't be a person like Emily that you would have had this great adoration for ahead of time. But is that part of your process that you've got to find that
You have
nugget?
to. You have to like or at least empathize with the person that you're playing. And I think as an actor, it's really fun when you get these very extreme characters to play. And I think Emily's extreme, Nancy's extreme. And people don't get to be extreme. They're not just born that way. Like,
Yes.
stuff happens to them.
That's right.
And so if you can understand that, you can, someone who we might look at their actions and say, "Oh, that's horrible," but let's unpack it and let's figure
Yeah.
out how they got to that place, because nobody, Nancy Reagan was doing the things that she thought were supremely important and supremely good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no one sets out to do
No.
something wrong.
No.
No. As listeners who are going to get to see this beautiful movie, what is it that you're hoping they're going to walk away with in terms of how they feel about Emily Dickinson?
I feel like so I think that our film is a biography of Emily Dickinson, but I think hidden in our film is another biography, and it's a biography of Terence Davies, who is the filmmaker, is the writer and director. And I think that when he really discovered Emily Dickinson, because he's English, so he didn't grow up with it. In America, we grew up with it. And he bonded with her so completely, and I think he found these major themes of her life running through his life too. And so I think it's both an opportunity for people to just rediscover or even discover for the first time Emily Dickinson and her poetry and her fascinating life. And also, if you don't know Terence Davies as a filmmaker and as an artist, it's a way to discover him. And I think they have so much in common. And one of the things they have in common is they have a very emotional, very personal, messages and thoughts that they want to get out. And because the form they want to use doesn't exist yet, they just invent it. And so it's so personal, and sometimes it's completely transparent, and sometimes it's opaque and fascinating, and you can bring whatever you want to it.
Beautiful. It's been amazing to watch your career. Like, you talk about your head coming up at a certain time, but to watch it expand and hit its stride. Is there one story, one person that you'd really love to play in the future?
Oh, well, there was, I played Eleanor Roosevelt in 2004. And we were trying to make a sequel in which it was about the first 100 days in the White House, when Eleanor was in love with Lorena Hickok, who was a female reporter, and nearly left Franklin. And I mean, it was a whole thing. And of course, the FDR presidency itself in the first 100 days, just politically, never mind personally, was fascinating. And I'm really sorry we haven't gotten a chance to tell that story, because I think, Lorena Hickok herself is a fascinating character and a great role for somebody. And, with Hamilton, and I think the presidency is an endlessly interesting thing. And, the people who get in there, some of them we love them and some of them we hate them. But, you don't, at least nowadays, you don't get in there by being boring.
We will wait with bated breath for the second part to that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot.